Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shinijino Arias, and now let's talk about the history of music in the Middle Ages. When was the medieval period of music? Accordingly, the medieval period of music began around the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD. It progressed into the 6th century and lasted through the end of the 14th century when it gave way to Renaissance music. Medieval era music centered around the church. Although secular music existed during medieval times, most surviving medieval compositions were written as liturgical music. So medieval period music begins on the fall Roman Empire in 476. So it has been stated here that medieval era music is centered around the church even though secular music was existed during that time. But of course, liturgical music has also evolved at that era. So most medieval music was vocal, the church front on instruments. Around 1100, however, instruments were used increasingly in church. The organ was most prominent. At first, it was primitive and could only be played by hitting it with your fist. So in that era, in the medieval era, the music was more on vocal, hindi siya written, more on vocal. So it has centered or frowned on the instrument of church. So the organ was most prominent. So when we say prominent, it is been highlighted or it was been essential at that time or nakasentro yung organ at that time sa medieval era. So at first, it was primitive and can only be played by hitting it with your fist. So when we say primitive, it has a simple way or in a basic form of hitting it sa mga instrument na ginagamit before in the medieval era. So it was so loud that it could be heard for miles around. So next, the Middle Ages period of Western music progressed through several stages of development. First, we have monophonic chant. Second, heterophonic and polyphonic development. Third, secular music. And lastly is Ars Nova. So let's talk about now what is monophonic chant. Accordingly, monophonic singing is based on a single unison melodic line was popular from the very beginning of the medieval. In civilizations spanning from Rome to Spain to Ireland, some religious chants called plain chant or plain song dominated the early medieval period. So monophonic chants like the Gregorian chant spread through Western Europe in the 9th and 10th centuries, by which time the Catholic Church had standardized vocal music to fit the Gregorian chant model. So when we talk about monophonic chant, it is based on a single unison. When we say single unison, meron siyang single melodic line na ginagamit sa instrument. So it was very popular from the very beginning of the medieval era. In the civilizations from spanning Rome to Spain to Ireland, it has a religious chant called a plain chant or a plain song. So, di ba, meron siyang single melodic line. So, it means plain lang siya, plain chant or plain song na ginagamit before in the medieval period. So, for example, a Gregorian chant. This chant is spread through Western Europe in the 9th and 10th centuries, by which the time of the Catholic had standardized vocal music to fit the Gregorian chant model. So in these kinds of chant, a Gregorian chant or a plain chant is considered as a monophonic chant kasi meron siyang a single line or a single melodic that used in that instrument before, kasi before Catholic Church was very vocal, has a standardized vocal music na ginagamit sa chant just like a Gregorian chant. So, monophonic nga, as what I've said, having a single melodic line or a sound transmission that involves a single path. Ayun nga, it involves a single path na it includes in that instrument, the instrument you will be using at that time of the era. So in this period, the content of the music was centered also in the liturgical compositions kasi nga nakasentro, di ba, medieval era or medieval music is has centered in the church. It's centered the church or in a liturgical music. So music uses both voices and instrument. It is more vocal than a written use of a yung composition niya. So a basic element of virtually all music cultures. It is a basic form kasi nga meron lang siyang single line or a single unison or a melodic line that is used in that chant, for just like the Gregorian chant. It is spread throughout that before the medieval era or in that period. So I have here now the example of the plain chant or the Gregorian chant. So listen carefully. It was also expresses the melodic line of that song. So as you've heard that song or that chant, it has only a single path or one melodic line. So that's it. As you observe the examples, you can now identify the chant or the Gregorian chant has one melodic line in that music or the liturgical music that we've been discussed earlier.
And this is my report, the continuation of Miss Shini Jean Orias, and I am Julina M. Corato, and my topic is all about the heterophonic and polyphonic development. As it became mainstream practice, plain chant underwent modest musical development. Then organum, a form of heterophonic singing, added a second vocal line to monophonic chant. This second vocal line followed the same melody, but it was staggered and was often a perfect fourth or a perfect fifth away from the main melody. More sophisticated still was the motet wherein additional vocal parts were set against a main melody of or canvas fermoso. Heterophonic or polyphonic development as it became mainstream practice. So, when we say heterophonic, the plain chant underwent minimal musical development as it entered common usage. So, monophonic chant was given a second vocal line in the heterophonic singing style as known organum. So, this heterophonic has a same way melody and it is attractive features in music. This is the most important thing in music because it gives an effective features when performing music. So when we say the organum means a plural organa or originally any musically or it is an instrument. So a good examples of heterophonic is the Gaelic band, the chef's tune, the Wayne that shakes the Barclay, and those are examples about the bands. Each instrument plays the same melody but embellishes slightly with grace. Diba when we heard about the band, they have the same what we call this one, the same tog like the bass. They have the same and have a similarities, diba? They have the same melody, but something plain chant. So when we say a polyphonic. So when we say poly, it has means many, so marami. So pero ang kaibahan niya sa heterophonic, yung heterophonic ay meron siyang same melody. Pero yung polyphonic is meron siyang meron siyang own melody na kahit pareho-pareho yung boses, but the melody of the polyphonic is same because its type of musical textures consisting of two or more lines of independent melody as opposed to a musical texture with just one voice. Just like I've said that it has its own melody. So that's how heterophonic and polyphonic development important in the music and industry, because it gives an attractive features and interesting outcomes when we're hearing the music. So that's all the examples of music in heterophonic and polyphonic. Please listen.
Notice how there was only one instrument.
So that's all.
So hi everyone, my name is Hanela Vernara, and right now we are going to tackle about secular music and sacred music. So in the medieval era, or in the Middle Ages, medieval music was both sacred and secular. So for much in the medieval era, art served a sacred purpose. So when we heard the word sacred, or when we heard the word sacred, what comes in our mind, or what thoughts or ideas that we can gather into our head when we heard the word sacred? So sacred is believed to be holy. So art in medieval era is very important and essential and have a significant purposes. So, secular music is music that is intended for non-religious audience. The term secular comes from Latin word saeculum, and this was used in the early Christian church to mean the world opposed to the church. So, a secular music definition, therefore, is music that is concerned with the affairs of the world rather than the affairs of the spirit or religion. It is any music not written for church, or a music that is separated from religion. It includes love songs, political satire, dances, and dramatic works. So, during the medieval period, the nobility used music as a way of increasing the prestige of their courts. Musicians known as troubadours and trouvers. These musicians were hired to entertain the courts and were needed as an accompaniment for dining, dancing, and tournaments. So, the troubadours are post musicians from southern France. Their songs are sung in vigorous dance rhythm, while the trouvers, these are the musicians whose songs are more into slow and southern mood. Both names came from French word which is trouver, which means to find. So they are finders or inventors of poems and melodies. So in this lesson, we will going to focus particularly between secular music and sacred music. So right now, all of us already know or have an idea what is secular music. So this time we will going to proceed, or we will going to talk about sacred music. So what is the difference between sacred music and secular music? So sacred music is music written and composed for church. So from the said meaning, we can already comprehend what is meant by sacred music. Just like instances, we individual or we people usually go to church every Sunday, right? So what can we observe inside our church, or what are the music that they play during our mass? Does our church play a song like rock songs? No, right? That because only sacred music should be played inside our church. To generalize, so secular music is music that is intended for non-religious audience. So while the secular music is any music written and composed for church.
final century of the medieval period is called Ars Nova or the New Art. It was based in France, Italy, and it was developed through Ars Antiqua, or what we call the Old Art. The Philippe de Vitry was the pioneer and a composer, poet, and music theorist in Ars Nova style of late medieval music. During this period also, there are more secular music was composed and the rhythm became more complex. Kasi nga, the fully engaged polyphonic music, from the word polyphonic, from the Greek word, it means many sounds. Kaya nagiging komplikado yung rhythm kasi maraming sounds na ginagamit during the Ars Nova. And then also, Ars Nova was nagiging sikat siya in the Kingdom of France in the medieval period time. Now, we're going to go to the 4 examples of the medieval composers. And the first composer of the School of Notre Dame is Leonin. Leonin lived in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and also part in the composers of the School of Notre Dame of Polyphony. And Leonin also developed the first form of polyphony music, and that is called organum. Organum is a kind of music that is a hollow sounding. Tinatawag siya na hollow sounding kasi nga Leonin, pinagsama ni Leonin yung old song at saka new song, and let his choir sing it, and that is called organum. And here is the example of organum music.
Thank you, my co-reporters. So we found out that the medieval period started from the 1476 AD to 14th century. So and now during the medieval period, Roman Catholic Church was most prevalent religions, and because of that, much of music development took place. So in medieval period, emphasizing the 3 types of music. The first one is that the sacred vocal music, secular vocal music, and instrumental vocal music in the medieval period. So, and now how we're going to distinguish the characteristics or distinguish about the music during the medieval period. And now we are going to discuss about the 5 characteristics of music during the medieval period. So in medieval period, there are 5 characteristics of music. The first one is monophony. Third one is standardized rhythmic pattern. Third is ligature-based music notation. Fourth, trovardos and troveres. And 5 is limited instrumental music. So and now let's start first with the monophony. So when we say monophony, until the late medieval period, most medieval music took place from form of monophonic chants. So when we say monophonic chant, that refers to the musical textures that made up of a single accompanied melodic line, which means that here in monophony music emphasizing that only one sound in a music. There is no combinations of other sounds but only one sound. When extra voices were added, they moved in a parallel motions to the main voice, unlike the counterpoint that would define the Renaissance and Baroque eras that followed. So here in monophony, if there is an applications of voice, is only one voice lang talaga yan. There is no other combinations of other voice. Unlike in Renaissance and Baroque, because in Renaissance and Baroque mostly is polyphonic. When we say polyphonic, it means that producing many sounds simultaneously. Not only one sound but many sound na nagkaroon na siya ng combination of sound in the music. That is for Renaissance and Baroque. And now, for you are to be familiar and observe the monophonic characteristics of music. Here are the examples of monophonic music. And now we are now in the second characteristics of medieval period, which is the standardized rhythmic patterns. Most medieval chants follow a rhythmic modes that brought a uniform sensibility of the medieval era. So when we talk about rhythmic modes, that refers the shape of patterns of how long or short durations of music. So here in the second characteristics emphasizing that the medieval music use or follow the systematic or standardized rhythmic patterns na kanilang gina-follow para so that the music will become a uniform. There's no combinations of other music but it is a uniform. These modes were codified in the 13th century music. Pure text De Miserabili Musica by Jonas Nes de Garlandia. So here yung rhythmic modes o yung set of patterns of how long and short durations of sound was arranged systematically in the years or during the 13th century by Johannes de Garlandia to his written works that called De Miserabili Musica. So what is De Miserabili Musica? When we say De Miserabili Musica, that refers to it is a musical treatise from the 13th century. When we say treatise, it is a written work dealing formal and systematic with a subject.
Hate to turn up out of the blue uninvited, but I couldn't stay away. I couldn't fight it. I had hoped you'd see my face and that you'd be reminded that for me it isn't over.
Ligature-based notation. When we say ligature, it is a graphic symbol that tells the musicians to perform two or more notes. So, the notation today is very different to the notation in medieval period. So, this is what it looks like. Number 4, troubadours and troubadours. When we say troubadours and troubadours, they are the musicians who traveled to perform. They only wrote non-religious music or secular music. They compose poetry song and melodic line. In composing a song, they use the language of Old French called langue d'oil. So, this is the example of the melodic line that they compose. Limited instrumental music. Why is it limited? Because there were only a few instruments in medieval period. So these are the instruments in medieval period.
And this would be the continuation of the 4 examples of medieval composers. So the second one composer is Pirutin. or Piritinus Magnus, better known as Pirutin, was a contemporary of Leonin in the Notre Dame school of Polyphony. He was heavily associated with the Ars Antiqua genre and is remembered for such work as Salvatoris Hodi and Magnus Liber Organi, or the Great Book of Organum. And then, the third one is Hildegard von Bingen. Von Bingen was a rare medieval female composer. Based in Germany, she composed monophonic chants for the 12th century Catholic Church. She is specialized in music for women voices. So, Hildegard von Bingen is a Catholic Church composer, which is she composed back in years ago. She composed a sacred music that related to that Catholic Church. For example, the music is the Alleluia. Then, the fourth one is Guillaume de Mauchard. Mauchard was the preeminent composer of the Ars of Nova school and a master of the Isodemic method. He composed sacred music such as Messe de Nostri Dami, but he was also a prolific poet and wrote extensively about secular topics like love and loss. So, Guillaume de Mauchard was the guy that could do most anything. Both the church and the secular would like him. Even leaders loved him. He wrote music to inspire to charge and wrote poetry that influenced greats. So Mauchard was special enough to have his music and poetry written down and illuminated in manuscripts. So the early medieval era, Mauchard is known for its somewhat dull or rhythmic one-part music, and although the advancements were made along the way, none came quite as far as Mauchard did in switching it to more lively and intricate styles. So that's Guillaume de Mauchard is very popular back then. So that's all.